Welcome to Sib Spot. Today's Reddit stories are from Entitled People. Story 1 is by Puzzle-Headed Brush 58. Customer writes bad review after keeping store opens 20 minutes after close. I've written on here before, but this one is just wow. Background. I work at a buy, sell, trade toy store that has both new and used toys. We also have a build station where kids can build minifigures. The store is located in a mall. So a woman and her 5 or so kids, we didn't count, came in on a Sunday and were wanting to make their own minifigures and look around the store. My coworker and I were more than happy to help them, and they all went to build their own figures. We waited patiently, then about 10 minutes before close time, we let them know that they had 10 minutes before we had to start closing procedures. Side note, there is 1 day a week where this mall closes early, which means the store closes early as well. They all said that was great, and my coworker and I went ahead and started cleaning up other areas of the store. After 10 minutes, we let them know that we would have to start closing down the store and we could start ringing them up if they wanted. The woman started getting extremely huffy and asked us why we were rushing them. I explained that our store wasn't allowed to be open longer than the mall was and that all store employees were supposed to be out at most an hour after close. We told her she could let her kids finish their figures and that we would give her 10 or so minutes to do so. When the 10 minutes were up, I went over to let her know. We had another conversation about why she couldn't stay longer, which turned into a 5-minute argument, where I was trying to stay calm and she was getting more and more aggressive. I told her she could either check out now or we would have to close. She got extremely angry and had all of her children put all their items into the minifigure making area and they stormed out. We ended up staying another 20 minutes to clean up after them and finishing procedures. The next day, my manager showed me the review she made. Here's what it said, paraphrased. We went in with my kids, unaware they closed early. They had a minifigure table, so I let my kids build some. They didn't let us finish or pay. Instead, they kicked us out and made us take apart our figures. The kids were super sad because we drove out of town to make them. I am extremely unhappy with the rude employees. My coworker and I explained what happened. My manager watched the footage and we did not get in trouble. Stories like this make me think that somebody's going to make a whole lot of money when someday somebody invents a way to lift the store up and shake it out like a salt shaker. Just evict them out of the store. No having to say anything, just pick the store up and shake it. And out they go. My imagination running wild again. Our next story is by Dami-chan. When's your flight? A few years ago, my wife and I were making our way to Gatwick for a bit of holiday. Back in the day, one could buy their train ticket to Gatwick at the turnstile before they got into the airport proper. Failure to do so results in a penalty charge of twice the maximum ticket price, or £80, whichever is greater, a mantra any traveling Londoner was familiar with, since it's posted all over the train network and automatically announced in all the trains and stations. This was an evening flight, so the train guy wasn't immediately there to take payments, since it was pretty quiet. Also back then, the portable pay machines were bulky and slow, so it wasn't like swiping your card and off you go. But of course, as one does with international travel, one leaves themselves plenty of time for such hiccups. We were about 4th or 5th in the queue when Karen huffs and puffs to the turnstile, only to discover that the gate wouldn't let her past. The train guy looks up and points to the big sign explaining the ticketing and penalty charge and goes back to processing payments. Karen decides that she needs to be at the front of the queue. But before any of us get up in arms, the train guy directs her to the back of the queue. Karen, oh so unpredictably, bemoans the fact that she's running late and she needs to check in and get through security. Train guy suggests she ask nicely of the people in front of her to let her in. Karen's version of nice amounts to, and I quote, "When's your flight?" I can't imagine why the old couple at the front of the queue said no, nor can I fathom why number 2 also didn't yield his spot. By the time Karen got to the lady in front of us, she was getting more and more baffled as to why her winning personality failed to win friends and influence people. Karen, what time's your flight? Lady on front, oh, I've got loads of time. My flight isn't for ages. But I was organized and got here early. Unlike you, my wife and I were laughing so hard that Karen didn't even bother asking us or anyone else behind us and went to the back of the queue in proper British style. By the way, lady in front really did have loads of time. We later walked past her chilling at one of the lounge bars, drink in hand, and we just grinned at her. What do you even say about a story like that? It's just somebody rude who thinks that when's your flight is going to make them be like, oh, mine's not for 2 hours. Go ahead and get in front of me. No, you politely say, I'm so sorry. Can I please ask you a favor? You're doing me a favor, so please, I will be so polite to you. Some people, that just doesn't apply. If they tell you that it's going to be a while till their flight, you really think they're just going to be like, yeah, go ahead, get in front of me. You didn't even ask nicely. Our next story is by Tassan B. Karen Encounter Story. Well, it finally happened to me. I'm not certain this is more of an entitled, selfish, or just run-of-the-mill Karen story, but here goes. A few weeks ago, I, 39 male, was on a work trip and went to a restaurant to get a meal at a casual-type local place. Since I had a few hours to kill, I decided to dine in rather than get takeout. It was early afternoon and the place was around 60% full. The hostess seated me at a two-top. Before I even sat down, I asked for directions to the restroom so I could wash my hands before eating. I left my ball cap hat on top of the menu at the table, mainly so any server would know someone was seated. After about the 2 minutes it took me to go wash my hands, I returned and found my table and one of the 2 chairs gone, my hat and the menu included. I turned around to look for a server when I noticed that a nearby booth had a two-top table with 1 chair pulled up to it. There were 5 people seated and only 1 at the two-top. On the floor a few feet away, I noticed my hat. When I approached to pick up my hat, I asked the people sitting there if they had moved the table. A woman in the booth, let's go ahead and call her Karen, responded that a friend showed up said they needed a larger or additional table and that this one wasn't being used. I responded that I had been sitting there and was using that and had left my hat on the table to indicate that while I washed my hands. She responded there was no hat on the table. When I asked how my hat ended up on the floor, picking it up and pointing to it next to her table, she said she never saw it. At that point, I noticed a waiter, so I gestured for him to come over. I explained that this party had moved my table over to their booth. I said I had no problem if they wanted to use one of the chairs for their additional guest, but that I would need the table. Karen cut me off at the end and said, to me, not the waiter, that I should just find another table since they were already using it. I responded to the waiter that I was using it, which is why I'd left my hat there while I washed my hands. At this point, the other woman who was sitting at my table started to get up to presumably give me the table back, but Karen immediately said, "Don't you dare," to her, and then stared at me with the waiter as if daring either of us to respond. The waiter started to say he was sure they could find her another table, but she cut him off with a typical Karen response. "We are not giving up the table, and I need to speak to your manager." This is when I decided I really liked the waiter and would give him a nice tip. He responded that he wasn't going to waste his manager's time on a complaining Karen and told her the options were to give me the table back or go somewhere else. I'm not sure how, but it worked. Except for the staring daggers and muttered comments, which I found amusing, she did not appreciate my periodic smirk or chuckle in response. Looking back, maybe I could have just moved, but I also assumed it was an innocent mistake until Karen opened her mouth and hit me with that patented attitude. Our stories for today have come to a close. Until we meet again, have a fantastic